Welcome to the Go Reflect Yourself podcast, bringing you real, practical, brain-based strategies to cultivate a life and business full of freedom and fulfillment, starting from the inside out. Working hard and staying busy will only get you so far. To truly become happy, content, and who we are meant to be, we have to move beyond physical capacities and begin to reflect from within. We have to change our thoughts and our mindset into our most powerful assets, transforming you to take inspired action so you can become a better version of yourself and have the life of your dreams.
You are stronger than you believe. You have greater powers than you know.
Welcome to the Go Reflect Yourself podcast. I'm so honored that you're here. And I'm incredibly honored today that I have not only an amazing guest with us, but a dear friend of mine. I'm so looking forward to sharing this time with you. So I'm going to jump straight into introducing our marvelous guest, Dr. Charisse Johnson. Doctor of Pharmacy is the Associate Dean of Experiential and Continuing Professional Education and Associate Professor of Pharmacy Practice at Chicago State University College of Pharmacy. Whew, I got all that in one breath. Dr. Johnson is a distinguished board member, guest speaker, and instructor. She also has a teacher certification from the Center for Kuru. Is that how you say that, Charisse?
Kuru.
Mindfulness. As well as she is a fellow instructor with me through the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. Charisse's mission is to serve academic pharmacy and higher education by assisting student pharmacists, pharmacy residents, pharmacists, and other healthcare students and professionals to navigate their respective professional environments more skillfully through development of self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and leadership, primarily through the lens of mindfulness. Her intention is to fulfill this mission through various roles as professor, practitioner, administrator, and speaker. And that is why we have you with us today, Charisse. Welcome to the podcast.
Wow. Well, thank you, Heather, for that introduction. When I heard it, I was like, who's she talking about? Who is that? But it's an honor and privilege to be here and to connect with you and your listeners.
I so appreciate that. And that bio was you. You're magnificent. And that's why you're here. So thank you. So let's jump right in if we can. Clearly, you have an extensive background in pharmacy, in the college, in helping grow future pharmacists and help them transition to the world. Why, though, have you attached mindfulness? Why is that an important part of this whole journey?
Yeah. So, if I think about other stories I've heard and how people have gotten to the pool of mindfulness, has been through suffering. And for me, it's been through personal suffering, professional suffering. And I was introduced to the practice by a very, very good friend just about 7 years ago. And it was a nice way to kind of calm myself and to pay attention to the breath. And okay, that was fine. And then life, happened with all of its challenges and hardships and interesting twists and turns. And I found that this was really an entryway for me to kind of really deal with my suffering and not going too much into the personal suffering, but just to say that I had a breakup. This was, in the midst also in going through a divorce and raising two young children and also trying to be the best professional that I could be. And so I entered the practice formally and really got serious about it. It was more about showing up the way I wanted to show up, and the calmness and the stillness kind of came along for the ride. But it was more about dealing with my personal suffering. And as I opened up my own eyes to my own personal suffering, I also was seeing the suffering of students as they pursued a pretty robust program, whether it was stress associated with their coursework, whether it was personal challenge. And so I thought about how this practice had been so influential and transformative for me. I thought, what about if I kind of brought this into the classroom? I had already brought it to work, so to speak, but what if I had the opportunity to introduce students to this particular tool that may be helpful for them? And so in 2016, I finished, or I should say, I began a program out of Duke University, the Center for Koru Mindfulness. And it's a formalized program that really introduces college age students to mindfulness and to various practices. So I brought this program back to the college, and students just gave me a lot of good feedback about it. And so it really encouraged me to keep moving this forward. So at the time, it was more so of a workshop, a series of workshops over the course of 4 weeks. But after the 4 weeks were over, students were wanting more. And so I thought about how could I give them more in a way that meets them where they are. And so, fast forward a few years after 2016, I petitioned our college's curriculum committee to introduce an elective offering. And so, in spring of 2019, I started to offer a 2 credit hour elective, really concentrating on mindfulness and how we can really bridge these practices formally and more long-standing within the curriculum.
That is a beautiful, and I love how you started that talking about connecting to your own suffering. And it's such an interesting thing. And I think that's one of the reasons that you and I connect so well together too, is our paths are very similar in a lot of ways, even though our professional career is different, but we can relate to that. But the thing that I really want to pick up on is professional and personal is not mutually exclusive. What happens in our personal life affects our professional life and vice versa. So when we're going through things, and clearly that's part of your journey, and I love how you put that though, of understanding and connecting to our suffering, we have to be able to break that down and process that. And so clearly mindfulness has been a big advantageous to you in going through those obstacles and hurdles. And what a beautiful gift now you're sharing that in your professional life and in your students' lives as well. It's just I'm stuttering because I can't say enough good things about that, and what a courageous thing for you to do, especially when it's not a normal part of the curriculum. So let's talk about how that's affected though, since it's not a normal part of the learning environment and going through the professional transition. You've been in the field and you're teaching as well. So you see all sides of how life professionally and personally are affecting people. But let's start where you left off with the students specifically. You said you introduced this and they wanted more. Why? Why do you think that was?
Yeah, I think you bring up a very good point about at least, my early attempts to, compartmentalize my professional life and my personal life and other areas of how I show up in the world. And inevitably, wherever you show up, you bring your entire self. So one context bleeds into another, and that's no exception for students. And so we focus, I think, a lot in higher education and, in my own personal opinion, humbly, on what students should know and what they should be able to do. But I think there's a lot of room to also be intentional about how they be and how they show up. And I think these practices, really marry quite well with giving students some tools about being intentional about how they show up with all of the challenges and the twists and the turns in life. And I think for me, and I tell the students in the elective, this is my favorite part of being at Chicago State. And I think because I'm able to bring in, not just Dr. Johnson, but also Charisse. And so I, am quite candid with students about, some of my interesting perspectives in parenting and my challenges in parenting and even being a partner. And so, there's a lot of sustenance for us to discuss, not about what they should know and what they should do, but how life is for them. And so I think that's been the transformative piece. It's the power of the practice. It's the connectedness and community about all of our suffering in its various forms and along the continuum. So, I truly feel in that class, I bring my entire self. I'm not trying to impress so much or say the right thing. And it's not a one-way exchange. It's more of a dialogue, and it's magical, honestly. So again, that's the best part of being at the college for me right now is this course. And honestly, I don't see myself as a teacher. I'm right at the front of the class as a learner because we're really experiencing all this together. I have not mastered mindfulness. I have not mastered emotional intelligence, but all of us have made this intentional decision to show up, and the students really have showed up. So it's been very fun and very rewarding.
What all I can keep repeating is what an incredible gift. And I like how you said that it's a two-way street. You're receiving just as much as they are in terms of your continued learning and the experiences that you're being a part of. Why do you think, and I don't I don't want to go too deep down this hole because I think we could talk for a very long time about education and the stress, we'll say, that we place on students of all levels. But why do you think that your particular group, I mean, clearly you have a very specific lane that you're involved in. Why do you think that they've latched onto it so well? Do you think that that is across the board, that all students of different types of fields of study would as well? Just can you talk to that a little bit?
Hmm. I think that's a great question. And honestly, I don't know the answer. But I think that again, these practices, community, and this exchange, is about reaching maybe the depths of students in a way that we normally don't meet them and in a way that I normally don't show up. So it really creates this container, which I think in a lot of ways we all yearn for, that connection um, and community, in our collective suffering and also in our collective triumphs. And so I think, again, I really don't know, but that would be my guess. And then with this particular set of students, because we are training them to really enter a helping profession, I even think that these tools are even more valuable. So there's a famous quote by Walter Cronkite, who, as you know, is a famous journalist broadcaster. And he said that America's healthcare system is neither healthy nor caring nor a system. And so, even though we've made a lot of strides in healthcare, as evidenced by the pandemic and all of the trauma that patients, communities, healthcare providers have experienced, we do have a long way to go. And so, preparing our students for the realities of the system and the practice and the hardship and the challenges, again, also in all the wonderful things that we do, I think is our responsibility. And so this is one of those tools, I think, that if we're intentional about, we can plant seeds that will hopefully grow and flourish and be accessible, and they'll be able to use them once they face some of the hardships and the reality of practice. And so I think a lot of your listeners, have been, familiar with the concern of late, especially during the past year and a half, about burnout and how those healthcare professionals, particularly who are directly involved with acutely ill patients from COVID-19, have suffered trauma in itself. And so, not that mindfulness or attention training is the answer, but certainly, it is potentially a tool to help navigate these waters when they come into very hard and very heavy situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't have said any of that better. And thank you so much for that. And I love that bridge of the responsibility, because you are training the future leaders in that system. And the more tools that you empower them with now can help in the future, which leads us to the current issues that we have. We have a lot of various crises, not just with the system, but with, you already mentioned, with burnout, with stress, with not understanding self-care, not understanding, well, I don't want to go off. I want you to answer that actually, because burnout and psychological distress, physical, all the distress that practitioners themselves endure, from your perspective, what is your view of that right now?
Yeah, so I have to say point blank that I am not on the front lines of practicing, and what I, share and what I convey is, my observation and maybe what I've learned from those who have been, again, directly on the front lines of patient care. But even if you're not, I think as a collective, even if we just reflect on what we've been through as a global community, it's been challenging. It has been challenging. Even watching the news and hearing the statistics and the death toll, rise dramatically or over the course of the pandemic, has been, I think, traumatizing in itself. And so I can only go by what I've seen and what I've heard, like many of your listeners and yourself, that, it has been traumatizing, and it's not over. It's not over. And so we're still in the midst of the pandemic. So again, I would think that, again, this is not the answer, but this is a way potentially for practitioners, for pharmacists, physicians, nurses, respiratory therapists, and all the other healthcare professionals and ancillary personnel who are really taking care of patients, as another resource to, potentially help them deal, with the trauma. And so I think you may have mentioned this already, self-compassion as a potential way to help deal with the trauma and the overwhelming emotions that certainly accompany all of the unfortunate sickness and death that we've seen over the past year and a half.
I would imagine. So I have to watch how I say this because I don't want to take anything away from the crisis, the trauma, everything we've seen in the past year. It's a reality. But from my perspective, I call this the pandemic of stress that has been here prior to the current pandemic that we've experienced. And my personal hope and mission is that we don't return back to quote normal. So I'm bringing this up because stress, burnout, the lack of well-rounded tools, that's that's not a new crisis that we're experiencing, if we can be very blunt about that. But clearly, the additional trauma and stress that we've gone through, and you're absolutely right, specifically to those frontline workers, and I will throw teachers in the mix also, in just dealing with that truly high impactful stress. It's much more apparent that our society, our entire humanity needs or could use perhaps more of these skills. Would you agree with that? How do you feel about that?
So, I'm biased because I have personally felt the transformative nature of these practices. But, I also think that it may not be for everyone at this time or in this way. And so for me, I want to be careful in touting that this is the answer and this is a tool that everyone should have. And so my personal mission is to introduce it. And some may say this is wonderful, and some may say no, and some may say not now. And so, whether it's mindfulness, whether it's spirituality, whether it's being entrenched in nature, whether it's being very clear about what your higher purpose is and how can we tackle some of the injustices and wrongs that we see in the world, whatever that is for them, that's their journey. But for me, this has been, again, a great tool that I pair with really every area of my life in terms of teaching, in terms of leading, partnering, parenting, being a neighbor, being a friend. I mean, it pairs very well, but I would be cautious to say that I personally think that this is the entryway for everyone. But with that being said, I think that you owe it yourself to kind of see what it's about before you say no, because I know that mindfulness, the term, has various connotations in various communities. And so making it accessible and applicable to the audience or the individual, I think is important as well. And so being able to introduce and be a vehicle to provide some knowledge around mindfulness and how it can be useful, I think is important.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And you're right. I would I would be bold enough to say all of those areas, spirituality, nature, doing the things that is comfortable for people, connecting to those things really is in and of itself a form of mindfulness. It's just labeling and how it's viewed, and how from the brain perspective then that it gets translated. But I really appreciate the awareness around, this is not the answer, but it's definitely a way to introduce, have awareness, and perhaps be an assistance to people in just a very general way. Now, I want to get a little bit more specific in for people who, obviously, if people who are watching or listening have watched or listened to any prior podcast, most of the things we talk about here on Go Reflect Yourself has to do with neuroscience, how it has to do with stress. We've talked a lot about mindfulness, but Charisse, from your perspective, when you talk about mindfulness, and clearly you teach it as well, can you just explain a little bit when you talk about the things that you do? If somebody doesn't understand, if somebody doesn't, this is new, and you're right, that term itself tends to, I always say that mindfulness and meditation, I used to think you had to be a bald guy sitting on top of a mountain for days and days to achieve some euphoric state of mindfulness or meditation. And that's just not correct. But in your terms, can you explain what this actually is?
Yeah, so for me, I would simply define mindfulness as being aware. And I reflect on my life. I haven't always been aware and really present, honestly. And I think since I've started a formal mindful practice, I've become more aware. So I'm sure you may be thinking, like, what do you mean? So, I mean, I'm so embarrassed to say this, but when I first had children, and my oldest is 15 now, my youngest is 11, when they were born, I really wasn't aware and present of them. I really wasn't. I was more concerned on kind of taking care of them and making sure that I provided for them, but really not aware of, their essence, so to speak, and how their eyes twinkled and how I just could appreciate their being. Like I wasn't there. I wasn't aware of that. And so I could beat myself up now, because I talk to parents now who have younger children, and I say, try to hold on to these times. Like, I'm trying to tell them from, my own personal experience. But, I can beat myself up now for what I, didn't do or did do in the past. But instead, I have turn to making sure that I appreciate them and I'm very present with them now. And I'm not there all the time. There are some times that I get in my own way, but there is an awareness about me being aware, so to speak. And so I think that's true, how I've showed up professionally too. I've had a lot of suffering, even professionally, and I was so caught up in the suffering that I didn't even know I was suffering. I did not even know I was suffering. So I remember when I was defending my thesis research project, I had finished my initial degree, the Doctor of Pharmacy degree, and I decided to go back and get a Master of Science in Pharmacy Administration. And I had come to the end of the road to finish the program, which was the defense of the thesis research. And so I was gathered in a room with colleagues in the graduate program, the thesis committee, the faculty who had worked with me on the research. My husband at the time was there. My mother was there. My sister was there. So everybody is in this room to support me. And I go to start my presentation and I start bawling for about a minute straight. I was so nervous and scared and just really stressed. And so we may call that an amygdala hijack, but nonetheless, I was so, entrenched in my suffering that I couldn't kind of separate myself from the suffering, and it overtook me. Now, with that being said, every time I give a presentation, have a talk, I get nervous before I speak. So that hasn't gone away. But there is this awareness now that, Charisse, this is going to happen. You know, your heart is going to race. You're going to have to go to the bathroom before you go to presentation. So now there's an awareness around it. And so not that the experience or my personality so much has changed, but there's a different relationship, with the suffering or with the anticipated anxiousness of presenting. And so for me, it's again bringing awareness where I think for me, it's helped me have a different relationship with my challenges as well as my successes. So again, I would just simply define it as awareness. And if we take it a step further, and again, these definitions, I attribute this to John Kabat-Zinn, of course, but and all the other wisdom teachers, but it's being aware. But how am I being aware? Not with an eye of judgment, but with an eye of curiosity, with kindness, and being able to forgive myself, just really showing up fully in the moment, no matter what the moment is. And sometimes the moment is really hard. But those tools really help me, again, keep a container of not being in the pool of the experience, but really kind of separating myself from the experience, but still being able to feel what's happening.
Wow. Thank you for that. And you're right, stress. So we all have our own reaction and our own life experience and formation that causes how we react. And most times we don't even realize that we are reacting. So the point, and I love how you put that, it's not that you are going to be different. It's not that stress is going away. It's not that you're not going to be in situations that's going to cause you discomfort. It's how you prepare, how you show up, how you process, what's your awareness before, during, and after. That's the evolution. And we're not striving for perfection. We're not striving to have no stress ever. We're striving to be better and deal with things so that way we can connect to those moments. And so you can appreciate your 15-year-old now and the things that he does and the things that may annoy you and the things that you love, but not beat yourself up for the moments that you may have missed. And that's,
Mhm.
I want to hit on that too, because you started talking about that a little bit. That's also part of awareness, is having self-compassion. We can go back and we can beat ourselves up, and you can look at all these woulda, shoulda, couldas, but it's having the awareness of, oh, now I can love myself. I can have this kindness related to that situation, and I can show up better now because of that awareness.
Yeah, and just acknowledging that life is hard. I'm going to experience failure. I am going to mess up sometimes. And Charisse, it's okay. It's okay. Everybody messes up. It's not only you. And kind of, talk yourself down, so to speak. And so, again, I have not perfected this. I have not. But again, a part of my own journey is being able to facilitate and teach this to others because, again, it underscores and it helps me in my own journey. So I think that's the most beautiful part about being able to do this, is that I've been able to, kind of bridge my personal life and what's important to me, which, also, overlaps and is very much part of, how I serve and, how I show up, professionally. And so it's a privilege. It's really a privilege to love what I do, and to work with the people that I do is an absolute privilege.
That's beautiful. And I just want to pull on one extra thread too of connecting with the suffering of yourself. And you keep talking about building this container. We don't all have the opportunity to be in environments where we have such a beautiful space to be comfortable exploring without judgment, and to have the curiosity around our mistakes or our desires. But that's why having the self-compassion and building your own container, so to speak, actually allows you to connect with others and connect with the suffering of others. And you started your conversation talking about that you're not teaching, you're also experiencing things. So you connecting with yourself helps connect with your students, which is a gift that just, the more we do that, the more we show up, the more we learn and we grow. And I think from a very simplistic perspective, and please correct me if I'm wrong in how you think about this, but that's really how we show compassion for humanity. And that's how we grow in humanity and help communicate and make better decisions, is first by starting. The more awareness and connectedness that we have with ourselves, we're able to give more.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I'll be very honest, Charisse is judgy. Charisse is a criticizer. Charisse sometimes is not very compassionate to others. I mean, that's the truth. And so compassion is just not a nicety, it's essential. And it's a skill that can be practiced and honed. And so again, I'm the student. I am the student. Even in this conversation, I am the student. Trying to drink and eat all of this. And so I think, yeah, there is this resonance and the interconnectedness of us when we show up in a way that permeates the context and the communities in which we inhabit. So yeah, and it's the other way around. I mean, I'm ready to receive it too, and so I think that's what makes it so beautiful. And so me having this intention is, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what feedback I get from any particular colleague or student that hears this. But more and more, I guess my greater intention or intention that I have is to really show up, with no mask. And I feel in a lot of ways, I may show up in the classroom as Dr. Johnson, and you won't see this fun and lively person in front of you. Or if I'm a parent, I may be cussing my kids out. And I do say that in my class all the time. I do cuss my kids out. I'm not proud of that, but I do. But more and more, I want to show up in a way that if a student sees me, oh, that's Dr. Johnson. When the kids see me and they listen to this podcast, like, who is that woman on there talking? I want to, be maskless and really, show up in a way that's authentic and true, and not perfect, and not always saying the right thing, and even sometimes having a loss for words, and maybe even losing it sometimes. But that's really my larger intent, is being maskless. I felt that I've wore a lot of masks in various contexts. And so a part of this journey is too about that. Even for me, I thought, like, after this podcast, I don't want to watch this and say, like, who is that person? That is not you. That is not you. So I think right now, I feel that this is me. But honestly, yeah, that's kind of where I am when I think about that. So
Well, and again, that everything you just said is such a gift and a blessing, because going back to how we started this conversation, we are trained, especially in certain academic roles in the academic world, but most certainly in the business and professional roles and worlds, we're trained to completely compartmentalize our lives. You wear your parent hat when that's appropriate. You wear your work hat, you wear your other fun, your serious, whatever. And that's not reality. So we do. And this is, I have such a passion for this. And I'm so appreciative for everything you just said, because we are a person. That's it. And to really show up at our best, to get Charisse at her best, we have to be comfortable for you not to put on a mask. I have to love and accept you and be open and have kindness and curiosity. But I also have to be honest with how I'm showing up. And I so appreciate you talking about being judgy, understanding our defaults and our patterns. I'm judgy too. And half the time I don't even realize it, but that limits my connection because of it. And this compartmentalizing that we've been taught really stifles our ability to grow, to connect, to be more authentic, to give more, to be more innovative. And that in and of itself creates so much stress to have to tap dance in that box alone and wondering constantly, am I saying or doing the right things for this environment? And clearly, yeah, there's appropriate places and times too, and not to say things, but I'm so appreciative for you being honest and vulnerable, because we're people first. That's just the way it is.
exactly.
Are there any final thoughts or takeaways that you would like to leave today, Charisse, with our audience?
I would just say I'm full of appreciation for this opportunity and for the invitation, Heather, because I absolutely love you. And so we were kind of talking before in our pre-meeting when you originally asked me to do this. My reaction was no, like no, because I'm not social media savvy. I don't post a lot. I'm more of a social media stalker. I look at what everybody else is doing, but I rarely post. So this is really out of my comfort zone. So I really appreciate you for being curious about my perspective and even having me on this podcast. And then appreciation to my family. I've talked about my sons a lot, so appreciation to them. I love them so much. They are my greatest teachers. They know the best of me and the worst of me, so I appreciate them. And then I also have a very proud mom who is sometimes too proud. And so I want to just send all the love to her, because she has been nothing but supportive of me. And then my sister and my wonderful friend nephew, who are the kindest spirits on this earth. And then also my partner, who has been very, very supportive in all of this. And of course, family and friends, those who I'm in contact with and who I'm not in contact with for various reasons. But all of that has brought me to this moment now. So I express appreciation for all of that. And I also have to give appreciation to Chicago State University College of Pharmacy, where I've spent my last 14 years now being able to serve. And again, I absolutely, absolutely love it.
You are an absolute blessing to me, to everyone that you come in contact with. And I am certain that if you're listening or watching this podcast, there are definitely nuggets that you've been able to take away. So we will post your LinkedIn link in our show notes, Charisse, if anyone wants to connect with you. You are also available for guest speaking and lecturing, and obviously around the topic of mindfulness, self-compassion, and available also as a Search Inside Yourself teacher and facilitator. So Charisse, I'm so grateful for this moment and this time. Thank you for giving your gifts to us.
Thank you so much, Heather, again.
And I want to thank you, listeners, if you're listening or watching. I so appreciate you. Keep on the lookout. We are going to rerun the Stress and Burnout Recovery Masterclass at the end of August. That was a free masterclass we offered in June. We're going to rerun that in August. If we can be of any support to you in your personal, your professional journey, please reach out. But thank you so much for listening or watching, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Go Reflect Yourself. Please rate and review this episode, and if something moved you, please feel free to share. For more inspired action or to stay in touch, head on over to goreflectyourself.com or heatherjcrider.com. You can also take the growth mindset quiz and learn where your current growth mindset lies. Stay in touch on all social media at Heather J. Crider. Until next time, this is your host, Heather Crider, and I am challenging you to go reflect yourself so you can discover and become who you are meant to be.